so for our AP Stats final project, we decided to figure out which bread reigns supreme. So we're trying to figure out which bread among the breads do students prefer. And so what we did was we randomly selected 2 beaver lodges from each grade, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And between those 2 beaver lodges, we flipped a coin to see which of the beaver lodges would get an unbiased survey and a biased survey. So you have 8 beaver lodges in total, and from each grade you have one with a biased survey and one with an unbiased survey.
So thank you. To have an unbiased survey and a biased survey, we made one option more appealing, one selection more appealing than another. So for example, on the unbiased form, we just listed each bread. It's a sourdough bread, French bread, wheat, white, and pumpernickel bread. But on the biased form, we said, good old sourdough or warm, fresh French bread, as opposed to putrid pumpernickel. So then we have results of all of those surveys here, unbiased along with the biased, and then we ran some tests.
Alright, so what tests did we run? We started with the chi-squared test for homogeneity, so that compares 2 distributions of categorical variables. So we're comparing the breads, which are categorical variables, and we want to see if there's a significant difference between the responses from our unbiased survey and from our biased survey. And the other test that we ran was the 2 proportion z-test for difference in proportion. And we ran this to see if there was a difference in proportions of our 2 most popular breads between the biased and the unbiased.
Which were sourdough and French bread.
That's right.
Yes. Alright, so with the chi-squared test, we ran that because it met all of our conditions, where we had a p-value of 0.375 as opposed to our significance level of 5%. So because that p-value was greater than the significance level, we failed to reject the null hypothesis. So there is not convincing evidence that the difference in the wording of the question affects the answers chosen.
And we had a pretty similar result for the 2 proportion z-test. So our conditions were met, and we had a p-value of 0.172 and a significance level of 0.05, or 5%. So once again, the p-value was greater than the significance level, so we failed to reject the null. So there was not convincing evidence that bias in wording affected the number of people who preferred French and white bread.
Alright, now moving on to our error analysis, there were a few minor hiccups that we either encountered or didn't expect quite so much. So there was the issue of non-response bias, because unfortunately you can't force students in your beaver lodge or a randomly selected beaver lodge to take your test. So we ended up with only approximately 71 out of 160 out of 160 surveys that were asked of. Only about 71 actually responded and followed through. So this also resulted in an underrepresentation bias, perhaps, because the students that were still in their beaver lodges able to take the test may respond differently than those who had left to go work with another teacher, retake a test, that sort of thing.
And another error that we encountered was something with our sampling size. So among 5 breads, wheat and pumpernickel got so few votes that our large counts condition wasn't met. So in order to be able to perform the tests and compare these distributions, we actually omitted the data for pumpernickel and wheat. Yeah,
Tests.
in the
They
tests.
omitted more. Right. So then, finally, with our results, sourdough was the best in the unbiased survey, but there was a drastic rise in the French bread selection percentage in the biased survey. Right, so sourdough won in the unbiased form, and French bread, which we kind of expected, won overall percentage-wise in the biased form.
And as for whether or not the bias actually has an effect on the answers, we concluded that after both chi-squared and z-proportion and 2 proportion z-test were performed, there was no significant effect of biased questions on the distribution of bread preferences. Thank you.
Yeah.